You've heard his name whispered across Africa, the youngest leader on the continent, the military man who defied France, and the rising face of Pan-Africanism. But behind the beret and the revolutionary speeches, who really is Ibrahim Traoré? Today we uncover 10 things you didn't know about Burkina Faso's mysterious leader, and why the world is watching him so closely. At number 1, he's the world's youngest president. In a world where heads of state are often gray-haired, career politicians with decades of bureaucracy behind them, Ibrahim Traoré shattered the mold. Born on March 14, 1988, in Bondoukoui, Burkina Faso, Traoré wasn't just young, he was historically young. When he seized power on October 6, 2022, he became the youngest sitting president in the world at just 34 years old. That's younger than most African ministers, many CEOs, and even some European parliamentarians. But what made his rise more astonishing was how fast and fearless it was. This wasn't a gradual climb through political ranks. There was no election campaign, no public debates, no handshakes in town squares. Instead, Traoré took power the military way, by force. In a carefully coordinated coup, he overthrew Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, who had himself taken power only 9 months earlier in a separate coup. The nation was in chaos. Islamic insurgencies had overrun large parts of the north. Trust in the government was disintegrating, and international partners were beginning to look the other way. Then came Traoré, a quiet, calculating officer from the artillery regiment, who many underestimated. But overnight, he became the face of a revolution. He was young, unfiltered, and deeply disillusioned with how Burkina Faso had been run. While some saw him as a savior bringing youthful energy and reform, others feared he lacked the experience to steer a crisis-ridden nation. But one thing was clear: the world had a new and unpredictable player on the global stage. At number 2, he studied rocks before he rocked the government. Before he was commanding troops and defying world powers, Ibrahim Traoré was a geology nerd. He attended the University of Ouagadougou, where he didn't just scrape by, he graduated with honors in geology, a field far removed from politics or warfare. His early ambition was to study the earth, explore its resources, and maybe work in the mining sector, which happens to be one of Burkina Faso's most lucrative industries. But somewhere between the lecture halls and lab reports, Traoré made a life-altering decision. In 2009, he joined the Burkinabe Armed Forces. It wasn't a complete pivot. His background in geology gave him a deep understanding of the land, knowledge that later proved useful in military operations across Burkina Faso's rugged terrain. Some say his scientific discipline shaped his military thinking, methodical, analytical, and surprisingly calm under pressure. Friends from his university days recall him as reserved, studious, and rarely political. But that quiet demeanor would later become one of his most formidable strengths. A man who rarely speaks, but when he does, everyone listens. His journey from rock samples to rifles, from mineral maps to national defense, remains one of the most unexpected chapters in African political history. He didn't plan to become a soldier or a president, but the soil he once studied would soon become the battleground he vowed to defend. At number 3, he was a UN peacekeeper in Mali. Before he was leading a nation, Ibrahim Traoré was boots on the ground in one of the world's most dangerous regions. In 2018, Traoré served in Mali under the United Nations Multi-Dimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission, MINUSMA, a peacekeeping mission deployed to contain jihadist insurgencies that were destabilizing the region. But this wasn't peacekeeping behind a desk. This was frontline combat in a country crawling with armed groups, extremist factions, and suicide bombers. MINUSMA has been described as one of the UN's deadliest missions, and Traoré was in the thick of it. His performance during this time didn't go unnoticed. Fellow officers described him as level-headed, fearless, and unusually strategic under fire. While others panicked during surprise attacks, Traoré was often the one coordinating calm and calculated counter-responses. It's here that many say the seeds of leadership were planted. He wasn't chasing medals or promotion, but he was building a quiet reputation as a soldier you could trust in a crisis, a man who didn't flinch, didn't boast, and didn't lose focus. This Mali experience would later become his badge of legitimacy. In a region plagued by war and unrest, Traoré wasn't just another officer in uniform. He had seen battle, survived it, and proven he could lead when bullets were flying. Many believe this chapter is what solidified his image as a man of action, not just words. At number 4, his military rise was quiet, lightning fast. In most militaries, moving up the ranks is slow, political, and grueling. But for Ibrahim Traoré, the climb from lieutenant to captain happened at a pace that left many within Burkina Faso's army stunned. He was promoted to lieutenant in 2000, just 5 years after enlisting, and made captain by 2020, a rapid rise in a rigid system known for gatekeeping promotions. What made him stand out? Insiders say it wasn't loud ambition or flashy leadership. Traoré was known for his stoic discipline, his ability to read the battlefield like a chessboard, and his refusal to be part of corrupt military circles. He was respected, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. There were also whispers that he was linked to the Cobras, an elite counterterrorism unit trained to respond to the growing jihadist threat in the Sahel. While the government never confirmed his membership, multiple sources claim Traoré trained alongside the unit and participated in some of their most high-risk operations. Whether he wore the Cobra patch or not, one thing became clear: he had access, he had trust, and by 2022, he had the confidence of enough soldiers to lead a mutiny against his own commanding officers. Most people didn't see him coming, but those inside the army, they knew Traoré was climbing and calculating. At number 5, he led 2 coups in 1 year. If one coup isn't shocking enough, Ibrahim Traoré pulled off 2 in the same calendar year. The first came in January 2022 when he supported the overthrow of then-President Roch-Marc Kabore. That coup brought Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba to power, promising change, security, and stability. But those promises unraveled quickly. Terror attacks escalated, citizens protested, and Damiba, once hailed as a savior, began to look more like the same old system, only in camouflage. That's when Traoré made his move. In September 2022, just 9 months later, Traoré and a group of frustrated officers led a second coup, accusing Damiba of betrayal and failure. He didn't just take his job, he took his mission. Damiba fled, and Traoré, still just 34 years old, became Burkina Faso's new interim leader by October 6th. What's even more astonishing is how little blood was shed. The takeover was swift, coordinated, and surgically executed. And when Traoré appeared on state TV for the first time in his now iconic red beret, it was clear this wasn't an accidental leader. This was a man with a plan and the loyalty of a significant portion of the armed forces. 2 coups, 1 year, one man now standing at the helm of a broken country, ready or not. At number 6, he's reviving the spirit of Thomas Sankara. To understand Ibrahim Traoré, you need to understand Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary icon often called Africa's Che Guevara. Sankara ruled Burkina Faso in the 1980s. He renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of incorruptible people. He preached self-reliance, Pan-African unity, anti-imperialism, and even rode a bicycle to work. He was young, bold, and uncompromising, until he was assassinated in 1987 during a coup. Now, decades later, Traoré is channeling Sankara's legacy like no one before him. The red beret, the revolutionary slogans, the firm stance against Western influence. Traoré regularly invokes Sankara's speeches, calls for African nations to break free from neo-colonial control, and even declares war on what he calls the puppet strings of foreign powers. To many young Africans, he's become a symbol of resistance, a modern-day Sankara reborn in a time of drones, debt traps, and global exploitation. But here's the twist. While Sankara was a civilian-turned-president, Traoré is a military man with command at his fingertips. And some critics fear that while he preaches Sankara's ideals, his methods may veer more toward militarism than idealism. Still, for a generation that never got to see Sankara live, Traoré is rekindling hope, pride, and Pan-Africanism in bold, unapologetic ways. Whether he lives up to Sankara or becomes a cautionary tale is still being written. At number 7, he co-founded the Alliance of Sahel States. In the heart of West Africa, 3 countries made a historic move, and Traoré was one of the masterminds behind it. In July 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, all ruled by military juntas, announced the creation of a regional bloc called the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. This wasn't just a political alliance, it was a bold, defiant statement to the world. We will no longer be controlled, dictated to, or divided by former colonial powers. For decades, these countries had relied on France for military support, economic deals, and international legitimacy. But under Traoré's influence, that script flipped. The alliance promised joint military cooperation, collective defense, and a shared vision of regional sovereignty, free from Western pressure. Many compared it to a mini-African NATO with its own identity and mission. And guess who was front and center? Traoré. In meetings, press conferences, and televised addresses, he emerged as the youngest, most vocal, and most ideologically driven member of the group. He called for economic independence, regional currency control, and the rejection of what he labeled as toxic aid with strings attached. To Pan-Africanists, it was a dream coming alive. To global observers, it was a geopolitical earthquake in the Sahel. And to France, it was a diplomatic nightmare. The alliance of Sahel states is still new, still finding its footing. But one thing is certain, Traoré is positioning himself not just as a national leader, but as a continental one. At number 8, he expelled France and embraced Russia. For decades, Burkina Faso's military operations were deeply tied to France, its former colonial ruler. French troops were stationed in the country, intelligence was shared, and military training was a constant collaboration. But under Ibrahim Traoré, that relationship came to a crashing halt. In February 2023, just months after taking power, Traoré gave France 30 days to withdraw all troops from Burkinabe soil. No negotiations, no apologies, just orders. The decision sent shockwaves across Europe. France had already been kicked out of Mali and was barely hanging on in Niger. Traoré made it official. The era of French military presence in Burkina Faso was over, and he didn't stop there. Shortly after expelling the French, Traoré began deepening ties with Russia. Reports surfaced of military cooperation, arms deals, and Russian advisors on the ground, some allegedly linked to Wagner, the infamous paramilitary group with deep involvement across Africa. While the government insists the Russian presence is limited to security training and logistics, many analysts warn that Burkina Faso may be trading one dependency for another. But Traoré sees it differently. In his view, Russia represents strategic partnership without colonial baggage. He believes Africa should pick its own allies, not have them imposed by history. And for his supporters, this pivot is proof that he's not afraid to shake the world order, even if it means walking a tightrope between sovereignty and survival. Love it or fear it, Traoré's foreign policy is clear, bold, and unapologetically anti-colonial. At number 9, he's reclaiming Burkina Faso's gold. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's top gold producers, but for decades, very little of that wealth stayed within its borders. Foreign mining companies, tax loopholes, and unequal contracts meant that while billions were extracted from Burkinabe soil, local communities remained in poverty. Enter Ibrahim Traoré and his vision for economic sovereignty. One of his first major moves as leader was to restructure the country's mining sector. He canceled several foreign contracts, launched investigations into illegal mining operations, and began working toward the nationalization of key mining sites. Then came his boldest move yet, the construction of Burkina Faso's first gold refinery, a government-funded project designed to process raw gold domestically instead of shipping it overseas. His goal? To stop the bleeding, to keep wealth within Burkina Faso, and to use gold, not foreign loans, to fund schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. In speeches, Traoré has often emphasized the need for resource control as the foundation of true independence. No nation, he said, can call itself free when it cannot touch its own soil without permission. Critics argue that nationalization could scare away investors, but supporters believe it's long overdue, a necessary correction after decades of exploitation. For Traoré, it's not just about gold, it's about dignity, and under his watch, Burkina Faso is taking back what was always theirs. Finally, at number 10, he's blurring the line between security and suppression. While many hail Ibrahim Traoré as a bold bold reformer and a Pan-African hope, others are growing increasingly concerned about his growing grip on power. Since taking office, Traoré has made sweeping changes, not just in the military or economy, but in Burkina Faso's entire political structure. In 2024, he dissolved the country's independent electoral commission, effectively placing control of future elections in the hands of the military. He then announced that no elections would take place until at least 2029, a 5-year postponement that alarmed human rights groups and pro-democracy activists. But it didn't stop there. Independent media outlets like France 24 and Jeune Afrique were banned, accused of undermining national unity. Dissenting voices in the military were quietly reassigned, silenced, or in some cases disappeared from public life. Reports have also surfaced about forced conscriptions, with young men being taken from rural areas under the guise of national service. Critics argue that these aren't just wartime measures. They're the early signs of militarized authoritarianism. They warn that a revolution without checks and balances can quickly become a dictatorship. But Traoré's supporters defend him fiercely. They say extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and Burkina Faso is fighting for its very survival against terrorists, corruption, and foreign interference. To them, Traoré is not suppressing freedom. He's protecting a fragile state from total collapse. Still, the question lingers in the air. Is Traoré building a new nation or tightening his grip on it? Time, as always, will decide. Please like and subscribe.